Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Today's pod is our annual Thanksgiving Mailbag, where we answer some of the great questions you've asked on social media over the last week. And joining us later in the pod is our good friend and new father, Adi Barkan. So we'll hear from Adi. Before that, a few quick housekeeping notes. There's a brand new episode of Tommy's On the Ground in Iowa series in your feeds right now. You want to tell us more about episode 2, Tommy?
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever wondered why Iowa gets to go first, we'll walk through that history. If you want to understand how the caucuses work, we'll explain that, and we'll actually take you to a caucus location in 2016 and talk through some very important rule changes this year that could change the way people see the results. And we'll go to a house party with undecided voters outside of Des Moines. We'll spend more time with the field organizers we met in episode 1, and I think you will like that part the most because they're awesome. But then if you hate Iowa and you think it sucks and shouldn't be first, stay tuned for episode 3.
Great. Also, the first season of America Dissected with Abdul El Sayed is now completely out. And Thanksgiving break is the perfect time to catch up on this fantastic series if you have not had a chance to check it out yet.
And it also includes an incredibly powerful conversation with Adi Barkan about healthcare.
That's right. That's right. Finally, we've got some new merch on Crooked.com. We got holiday merch. We got gay news shirts. We got Call Congress sweatshirts that are, I'm told, the softest ones we've ever made.
Which ones?
I guess the Call Congress shirts.
Cool.
Softer than
Softer than gay news?
softer than the Republican response to Donald Trump's crimes.
The
Workshop it. Come
the
back
gay
later.
news shirts are legitimately really cool shirts.
I'm definitely going to put, I definitely was thinking we should do a funny picture where you two are in the gay news shirt and I'm not, and I'm just furious between you.
And
I'll
you're
do
just
it.
in like a Patriots jersey or
Yeah.
something.
I will always be a prop. Okay, so make sure you're following at Crooked Media on Instagram to find out all the new merch that will be dropping all season long.
I think-
I'm just doing the marketing stuff.
I think Pundit thinks that rug is outside. I think she thinks that's grass.
Yeah, no, we can have a whole bunch of
That
excuses.
happens.
Okay, let's get to the mailbag. And we're going to start with a few questions about impeachment. Indigo Swirl on Twitter asks, that's my favorite part of doing this, if the House votes for impeachment, how will Senate proceedings differ from the ones we are watching?
Is that indica or sativa?
Who wants to kick that one off?
Well, I think I'll take it. I think it's
Just tell us how much more or less pizzazz there will be in the Senate.
I think we can actually expect more pizzazz, in part because this is now going to be, as Trump said himself on Twitter, home turf.
What a jackass.
And congratulations to all the Republican senators who now are viewed by Donald Trump as
The home team.
the home team.
Is owned.
He's probably right.
He's probably right. But this will be a trial in which Republicans will be in control of the majority and will determine the rules. It will be presided over by Chief Judge John Roberts. How this all plays out, we don't know.
Justice.
What'd I say?
You called him Chief Judge.
You know what? I'm sticking with it. And, what the Senate will do, the predictions have run the gamut from conservatives saying that they should drag the trial out for 6 months to try to make it about everything but Ukraine, all the way to conservatives saying that it should be dismissed without ever having a trial. Those happen to be both arguments made by Hugh Hewitt.
Oh my God.
But
Latest reporting is they're thinking about 2 weeks. That's reporting from Senate Republicans and people who know about Senate Republicans and the White House on background. So we'll see, but it could change.
it could change.
Can I ask you guys a question? So
Sure.
there was a good piece in, I think, New York Magazine about all the rules and how it works. And I think the key thing people need to know is that the Constitution writes very little about the rules of impeachment. It's really all deferred to the House and the Senate, and so they get to pick a lot of these things. But there's a question about how much senators are or not allowed to speak about the trial during the trial.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're a juror, so you sit there silently. But there seems to be a question about whether they're allowed to discuss it after the hearings are over or on the weekends or whatever, which if there's a gag rule on them, that is materially different for those running for president and would be a big deal.
It would. I think, as you said, Tommy, what the Constitution says about the Senate trial is only that the Chief Justice presides and that you need 2/3 to convict. That's all it says.
Yeah.
After that, it depends on what the Senate rules are. The Republicans control the Senate. There was a note in that piece that you talked about, Tommy, that Ed Kilgore wrote in New York Magazine that in the Clinton impeachment, there was unanimous consent, meaning everyone agreed on what the rules of the Senate trial were. I find it hard to believe that there'll be unanimous consent on the rules this time around. No. But it does show you how much leeway Mitch McConnell has to set the rules. What has happened in the past, what should happen is there are House managers which act like prosecutors, So a few House members, Democrats, will present the Democrats' case for impeachment because presumably the House at that point will have voted to impeach the president. And so the House managers will act as prosecutors. They will present the case. Both sides will be able to call witnesses. But again, whether those witnesses are accepted, everything else, it's all going to be set up by these rules in advance that the Senate agrees on. Now, the only thing is, for Mitch McConnell to set these rules, he needs, of course, 51 votes. So if he tries to pull anything too shady, you could imagine a scenario where a Susan Collins, a Lisa Murkowski, a Cory Gardner, some of those people, Mitt Romney, even people who might ultimately vote to acquit Trump, may say to themselves, I don't know if I really want to do this whatever crazy unfair thing that McConnell wants to do, though, we'll see what level of tolerance they have.
And there's also, I think, the John Roberts question. He is a conservative, but he's also someone that takes a great deal of pride in representing the court faithfully. So I think it's an open question how active a role someone like John Roberts would play versus someone like William Rehnquist during the Clinton impeachment.
One other thing here I just want to raise because I read it this morning. Josh Marshall in Talking Points memo got an email from a former U.S. attorney noting that Pelosi spoke the other day and she said, so we didn't get Bolton or Mulvaney or any of these people to testify. The Senate may be able to get that testimony. And this former U.S. attorney said the reason why is, and what Democrats may be thinking is they could call John Bolton or Mick Mulvaney as witnesses in the Senate trial. And then instead of it going to court, the person who would decide whether it was acceptable to have them as witnesses or not is John Roberts. And so instead of having stuff hung up in court until the summer, John Roberts could just decide right then and there to do it. Now, Roberts could say, I'm not going to make these decisions, I'll kick them to the Senate. But again, I'd rather Susan Collins vote to say, no, none of these people should testify and have to take that politically painful vote than to just have it tied up in court. So it could be what the Democrats are thinking on this.
Good for them if they are. That's savvy.
That's smart Democrats. Man, Democrats.
What a new feeling, huh?
Smart Democrats? Thinking strategically, planning ahead?
You might say they have high hopes for a living.
Oh my
I
goodness.
can't get it out of my head.
I know. And I don't say that in any way to denigrate the Pete campaign or anything else. It's just that song is an earworm and I hate it.
Someone on BuzzFeed set the High Hope song to a video of the 96 Democratic Convention with Hillary Clinton dancing and people doing the Macarena, and it's so funny.
So there's like a theory of the internet that says it's impossible to tell the difference between extremism and the parody of extremism, that it ultimately always looks the same. And I think that there's a corollary, which is dorky, sweet earnestness is impossible to distinguish from the parody of it. And so my feed is filled now with two sets of videos. People earnestly doing the Pete dance and people ironically doing the Pete dance. Yeah. It's all the one dance. Also, you all look the same. I cannot tell the difference.
I would just say to anyone making fun of the kids in those videos, when you're doing visibility and you wake up at 4 a.m. to go stand on a corner at 5 a.m. and you're there for 12 hours, you need to do some things to stay warm and to occupy your mind. So if you want to do a stupid dance, do a stupid fucking dance. Like, good for them.
Yeah, all of the mockery should be in good fun only because these are people out there knocking on door. I feel that too. I'm sick of the fucking cynical internet anyway. But I'm going to keep having fun with it.
The song will break me.
Jason Tondro on Twitter asks, can the House's vote to impeach or the Senate's vote to impeach be held anonymously, presumably freeing some Republicans to vote their conscience? Is that even possible? It sounded crazy at first, but Juliana Glover, who is a Republican lobbyist in D.C., wrote a piece in Politico about this, where she raised the fact that because, as we just said, that the Senate can basically set their own rules with 51 votes, technically the Senate could probably set a rule that it could be anonymous voting. Will they? seems doubtful.
Right, and you think of it like a jury. It's outlandish when you consider that, like, well, hold on, these are members representing constituencies, representing states. They ought to be on the record. But then you think, well, they're also behaving like a jury, and jurors often are able to cast their votes anonymously. So it seems very, very unlikely.
Rural juror.
Rural jurors.
I
honestly, we're gonna get fucked by a bunch of rural jurors.
It's a interesting idea and question. I think in practice, after the vote, the first thing that would happen is Lindsey Graham would be like, teacher, I voted to get you off, and everyone else would follow suit, and it would be
it would be so
point.
It would be so funny because that what people said publicly and the final vote tally would not line up. It'd be like, some of you are lying. Some of you voted to remove this guy.
Michelle Bopp on Twitter asks, whatever happened with the making the military stop in Scotland to prop up Trump's failing resort stuff? Is it still under investigation? Will it have enough steam to include as an article of impeachment? What do you guys think? Whatever happened to that? It's still there.
It's still there. There was a story in Politico, I think, that showed that there were, I think, $250,000 worth of expenditures at that resort. There's the ongoing problem of the U.S. Secret Service having to pay tens, if not hundreds of $1,000s to like rent golf carts and things from Donald Trump and put money in his pocket. So, yeah, it's terrible. It's grifting. It's something that should be, examined by the Oversight Committee or whatever the appropriate places. I don't think there's any chance it becomes part of impeachment.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why there's no chance or very little chance is because we just saw 2 weeks of sort of painstaking hearings where witness after witness comes forward, and Republicans try to muddy the whole thing up, and I think Adam Schiff and the Democrats in the House Intel Committee were near flawless in their performance here. But you could, it's hard now to imagine another 2 or 3 weeks of hearings where you bring in all these witnesses and start educating everyone about the emoluments clause and what it is. Regardless of that, though, because so much of impeachment is an exercise in public education, I would hope that as the House managers make the case in the Senate, or even as the judiciary considers articles in the House, someone raises and makes a little speech on the fact that the president's foreign policy could be influenced by the fact that foreign governments are making him richer every day and have been since the beginning of the presidency. And really it fits right in with his sort of corruption with foreign policy in the Ukraine scandal too. So I think it's not some side issue here. I think it's good for Democrats to sort of weave it into the larger story at the least. All right, let's move on to a few 2020 questions. This is from Jennifer DB on Twitter. Please opine on the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates' respective foreign policy experience, and if you have specific advice you'd give them. Tommy, this one's for you.
Their experience. Okay.
You can just go with the top ones. I think it's too much to go through all 20.
I would happen to agree with you. Mayor Pete in Tulsi served in the military. That's relevant experience. I think Bernie Sanders has done a ton of work since 2016 on foreign policy. He's got a really smart team, and he's shown a lot of interest and fluency in the issues. So, for example, there was a leadership change in Bolivia recently. Evo Morales was forced out. Some say it was a popular uprising. Some say it was a coup. And it's actually become a distinction on the left between Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. So that's one recent area where they're starting to talk about these issues. Biden has the most experience, period, but he also voted for the Iraq War, so that probably cuts both ways. Who am I missing here?
Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, look, I mean, she has put out a bunch of plans. She gave a major foreign policy speech early. She's smart and thoughtful on almost all these issues.
Yeah. Biden does, I think when he is at those debates and says, I've met all these foreign leaders, I've traveled around the world.
I think it works.
Like he does have, like you said, someone could make the weaknesses, someone could make judgment arguments against him about Iraq, but his foreign policy experience, even before he ran for president or was vice president, was extensive. Can
I just say one thing? Like, he gets dinged a lot for voting for the Iraq War, and he should, and everyone who ever voted for that war should, has to own it. But he's also, I think, learned from that mistake and was like one of the people in the Situation Room in 2009 arguing against sending tens of thousands of more troops to Afghanistan. And I think in hindsight, his position was right and the decision Obama made was wrong. So
yeah. And one piece of advice, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but I am a worldo. I was, and I think I said this in the focus groups I did for the Wilderness, I was surprised at how many voters who are sort of low information voters don't pay a ton of attention to the news, aren't, familiar with all the details of every policy as we are, brought up on their own when talking about Trump, how embarrassed he has made them feel to be Americans and how he's embarrassed us on the world stage. And we got to get rid of this guy because he has, ruined all of our alliances, and we're worried about that. And what if that doesn't make us safe? And I was just like, it's as those of us who worked in politics for a while know, it's hard to get voters to care about foreign policy when there's not an imminent war or terrorist attack or something like that. And to have all these people talk about America's standing made me think that's an argument that Democrats should probably make more, because you don't hear it very much.
Mm-hmm.
This is from Osho Chell on Twitter. What do you think is the best strategy for Bernie to win the nomination? What's he doing right, and what should be the focus? Sometimes we don't talk about Bernie enough, and he's one of the front runners, so I figured this would be a good question for us. Lovett, what do you think?
I would say, I don't know how you do this, but I think the clear question for Bernie is, how do you broaden your coalition beyond the incredibly enthusiastic, young base that he has built since 2016? There was this question after 2016, which is what share of Bernie's support was pro-Bernie, what share of it was anti-Hillary. I think what we've seen is there was a good chunk of people that were with Bernie and are not with him now, but that does mean that he could earn their support again. And I don't know exactly how he should reach out beyond the fervent support he currently has.
I think you make a really interesting point, because when you look at some of the data out of Iowa, like Bernie's, so the Iowa State University has been polling people and then repolling portions of their respondents. And the Bernie people are rock solid. They're not going anywhere. And then everyone else's candidate, they're just sort of bumping around. Like Warren gained a bunch and she lost a bunch. And you can see the fluidity of the race, that like 60% kind of willing to be convinced cohort. And then there's just the rock solid Bernie or bust folks. And I'm not saying that they would like not vote for the Democrat in the general. I'm just saying they're like
fervently
all in for Bernie. And it's a big question whether their strategy is even to expand the base this time, or whether they think like, if we're over 15% in a whole bunch of precincts, we're going to be viable, and like they can outlast everybody else by just sort of getting through it. I get the sense that that's their strategy. They're not really trying to grow. They're trying to maintain, but I don't know that.
So I think, one path for him would be he's been like second or third or fourth in Iowa, right? So let's say he either wins Iowa, which is within reach for him, or he comes in second or third in Iowa, right? You can see anywhere from 1 to 3 in Iowa, Bernie keeps going.
For sure.
Now he goes to New Hampshire. He won New Hampshire in 2016. It's always been a good state from him. He's from Vermont, with a little bit of momentum. Now say, if someone like Pete wins Iowa and then it's tough for Warren to keep going, or Warren wins and it's tough for Pete to keep going, you start winnowing the field after Iowa. You get to New Hampshire. Obviously, Joe Biden will still be there. Now Bernie wins New Hampshire. Now he came in first through third in Iowa and wins New Hampshire. Now they're both off to South Carolina. And after Joe Biden, the one candidate with the most support in the black community is Bernie Sanders. He has more than Warren, or certainly more than Pete or anyone else. At least nationally. In South Carolina, it goes back and forth. But so then he's got a race against him and Joe Biden. And then he tries to make the case at that point. He doesn't need to make the case that he's a democratic socialist, but he needs to make the case that he is the more progressive alternative to Joe Biden.
And it starts to look a lot like 2016. The one thing I would add to that is, okay, that's the kind of political delegate path and how it could all play out. I do think that, thinking about it just rhetorically, if I were thinking about how Bernie needed to go beyond his current base of support, I would think, what is the language he could be using to reach out to people that doesn't in any way contradict his rhetoric and his left-wing credentials? And to me, I think that there's a part of the case I would really be interested in Bernie talking about more. So he has this critique. He has this incredibly powerful critique about what's broken in our system, the power of corporations, the need for a revolution of working people. And I think it resonates with a lot of people. And I also think one thing, I know it from my own family. You see it in the polls. You see it in how people respond to Bernie. You believe him. You like him. You know that he's telling you what he thinks. It's what makes him such a strong debater. When he says something on that stage, he has this incredible armor of him never ever seeming as though he's being political. He's always telling what you think, what he actually believes, and it's effective. I think that there's a positive version of his story that he doesn't often tell, not just about the villains he'll take on, the enemies of working people, but a positive vision for the kind of America he sees and what he sees as the opportunities he would have as president, and the reason this fight is ultimately worth it, the good that people can do, the positive outcomes, the good in America that he's trying to exploit. And I think if I were thinking about how to get Bernie to see beyond the current people supporting him, I would start there.
The other thing that's notable, I think, is they just announced 4 million individual donations, not donors, but donations, which makes me believe that there's several million donors. And if he can turn all of them on the day after Iowa and get $10 out of people, he's coasting financially into New Hampshire.
Yeah, 3 candidates definitely are going to have the cash for the long run here. It's Pete, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders. This is from Sonia on Twitter. What could a Democratic president really do on actual day one of her or his presidency in 2021? How much can realistically get done that day? And what could they do/fix by executive action on the very first day?
Well, it depends on your bedtime and your wake up time.
And whether or not you're a procrastinator.
Yeah, are we talking 9 to 5?
You can get a lot of EOs drafted during that transition.
What about executive time?
We walked into that White House on day one, and our emails didn't work.
We had those fake Gmails.
We couldn't figure out what to do. You literally get on buses after the inauguration, and the buses drop you off at the White House, and you get in there, and you sit at your computer, and you're like, now what?
How do I work? What do I do?
What happens?
Yeah, I mean, things that people have proposed are Kamala Harris has talked about proposing gun control executive orders, if Congress doesn't act in the first 100 days. So that's more of a reasonable time frame, I think, than day one.
Yeah, Warren has proposed a moratorium on drilling. You could get all the candidates, or most of the candidates have proposed getting back into the Paris Climate Agreement on day one. The American Prospect did a very cool project called the Day One Agenda that everyone should go check out. You just Google it, and laid out a whole bunch of other executive actions that they looked at legally and that the president could do on drug prices, effective marijuana legalization, labor movement stuff, corporate accountability stuff. So I think there's a lot you could do. I would say, from a media perspective, it's probably not a great idea to do a ton of things on day one, even though you could pass a bunch of executive orders on day one and sign a bunch of executive orders on day one. It's not great to do a bunch because you can only get so much media attention at one day. And I think one thing we suffered from in the Obama administration at the beginning is, like, we passed the Recovery Act, right? And in addition to, like, propping up a kind of economy that was about to collapse, the Recovery Act also made, like, historic investments in education, in clean energy, and all these other things. Never got credit really for any of it because it all happened at once.
Yeah.
And one of the things you learn when you're in the White House is, like, you have to really sort of spread out the accomplishments, and then when you achieve something, really hammer home the accomplishment in the media, because when things happen too fast, people forget about them, and then when it comes election time, they're like, well, what have you actually done for me?
Yeah, it's not just a political concern. I do think it's a genuine governing necessity, because proving that the ideas that we believe in are not just policy, not just good on policy grounds, but good politics, I think is really important. One other thing I'd say is I think you also just should divide them into 2 buckets. There's the bucket of undoing the damage Trump did.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of environmental rules, coal rules, pro-corruption decisions. There's a host of things that I would say are more urgent, and I would say you do those very quickly, and then you look at the kind of the new and positive changes you want to make as something you mete out in the early days of the administration.
Fire all those lobbyists. Like, the personnel stuff is a big deal. Like, getting a white nationalist named Stephen Miller out of the White House is a big deal. Putting someone in charge of the State Department that's not denigrating and, like, driving out career diplomats is a big deal. Like, there's so many, every little thing is going to be such a welcome change.
I would love so many more questions at the next debate, and just of the candidates in general, about executive actions, plans to do stuff without Congress if Mitch McConnell retains control of the Senate, which is very possible.
Will you do a White House briefing?
Yes. And questions about, like you just said, Tommy, personnel. Who were you thinking about? What kind of person would you put in this position? And yeah, because I think it's really important, and it may end up being the primary power of the president, the next president. From Moni Ray on Twitter, what are your thoughts on making presidential primaries all in one day? To that, I would say, if you enjoy what Michael Bloomberg's about to do with $50 billion on television, that would be the kind of campaign we would have.
Very bad idea.
I think it's a very bad idea, especially because I think, in a primary, there are flights of fancy. There are moments of mania. Candidates rise and fall in the polls. And I think the idea, I guess what I would say is if you think that's a good idea, think about all the different days that primary could happen and how many different candidates have led at different points in the primary.
Yeah.
The good thing about our system is A, it means that everybody gets a say over time, and B, candidates have to kind of really be tested out in different forums over time, small states, big states, caucuses, primaries, and I think ultimately it redounds to the benefit of democracy.
In episode 4 of my Iowa series, we go through some other potential ways to do it that might be better. So stay tuned.
Well, and look, and you have this, you've covered this in the Iowa series too, but plenty of criticisms of the homogeneity of the caucuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're too old, they're too white, they have all kinds of problems with them. But the fact that we have a primary system now that forces candidates to compete in person and travel around smaller states and meet people and hold events is very important. I do not think we want a democracy where the only time we see these candidates is on their television ads or in these debates. People should be able to meet candidates. So should we have more diverse states? Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about that. But they should be forced to walk around these states and meet people.
I've got a pitch. What if New York City went first?
Ugh.
You're welcome.
I got a pitch.
You're welcome, hometown.
Only blue check marks on Twitter get to
Yeah,
vote.
that's right. Yeah, they should run through the fucking gauntlet of the blue check marks. See if you piss everyone off. All right, let's get to some other issues. Rachel on Twitter asks, what is one issue that hasn't gotten any attention recently that you've been dying to talk about, but there hasn't been room in the show due to the election and impeachment? All of them, Rachel. There was a story in the New York Times last week
Fake news.
about FedEx.
Oh, yeah, that was great.
FedEx and their lobbyists and their CEO lobbied relentlessly for the Trump tax bill that Trump pushed for and the Republicans all voted for. And as a result of that, in 2017, FedEx paid about $1.7 billion in taxes. In 2018, their tax bill was zero.
No, they got a rebate.
Yeah, that's right.
They got a rebate. The government paid them.
The government paid them. Sorry. Technically, the government paid them. And during the lobbying for this tax cut, FedEx said, oh, well, if you give us this tax cut, we will invest all this money in equipment, and that will create jobs, and that will stimulate the economy. There was no investment. The money went back to their wealthy stock shareholders.
Buybacks and dividends.
So that is one. So there's two stories that are connected here. So that is one story. On the other side of this, we just had 2 elections in Kentucky and Louisiana, where in Kentucky, Andy Beshear, part of the reason he won is because he expanded Medicaid in that state, or he defended the Medicaid expansion that his father actually did, and the Republican opponent, Matt Bevin, the governor, had tried to cut Medicaid. In Louisiana, John Bel Edwards is there for a second term as Democrat because he fought for the state's Medicaid expansion, and his Republican wanted to get rid of it. Donald Trump, if he wins a second term, will gut the Medicaid expansion in every state. Will gut Medicaid. Millions and millions of people will be thrown off Medicaid, and they will tell us it's because they can't afford it. FedEx just saved $1 billion, and Donald Trump wants to cut Medicaid. Every Democrat running for office, and especially the presidential candidates, should be talking about that trade-off, the tax bill for health care cuts in this election, and they should not wait till the general. Someone bring it up on stage next time. Next time we're in the Medicare for All cul-de-sac, because I guarantee, and we saw this in our Wisconsin poll, it probably polls better than anything else. That's my issue.
I have 2. One is, so the Montgomery Advertiser ran a story where they talked to prisoners inside of the Alabama prison system in truly horrid, horrible, animalistic conditions. They have just been abandoned and left to fend for themselves. There are drugs and weapons. It is cruel and unusual punishment being meted out on a massive scale. And so, to me, that would be one area where I just think, we talk a lot about criminal justice reform, and I think it can be quite bloodless, but the actual urgency of it and the injustice of it would be one. The other story, this is just something that's on my mind generally all the time, is, we talk about the importance of infrastructure. We talk about tackling climate change. We talk about high-speed rail and traffic and the high cost of living. One thing that contributes to all of these problems is the fact that in the United States, building costs more by an order of magnitude in some cases than it costs to build trains and tunnels and bridges and roads. Not in countries without labor standards or environmental standards. We're talking about our costs being more than double than parts of Europe, and it means that our capacity to deal with everything from housing costs to traffic to clean energy is hampered by the fact that every mile costs twice as much or more to build, and it's a crisis everywhere in the country, and it's something that there's no one cause of it. There's a bunch of different causes, and a presidential candidate who can start thinking about that, politicians who can take this issue seriously, will be doing an incredibly important service, because all the ups and downs of politics, this one issue is hampering us constantly and will continue to do so for decades unless we figure it out.
I think we should be talking about civility.
Oh, shut the fuck up. Fucking.
So Ben Rhodes and I talked about this on Pod Save the World this week, but remember North Korea?
Oh, yeah.
Remember how they were building nuclear weapons? Mm-hmm. Remember how they were building missiles that can launch those nuclear weapons and hit the United States? They're still doing that. And Trump's effort at a diplomatic play has done nothing but buy them another, 18 months of time to make more weapons and more missiles. And on top of that, he is currently trying to extort the government of South Korea to pay us 400% more to station U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula, something that allows us to project power into the Asia-Pacific region and is obviously a hedge against this North Korean aggression, because we can spot their missiles when they launch them. We can monitor them all these ways.
What's he extorting them in exchange for? Which investigation into which opponent?
I don't know. Good question. Yeah, Tulsi. And so the combination of those two things, allowing the North Korea problem to fester, which is admittedly a hard problem, but he's failing, and driving our allies in South Korea away from us, has led to the South Koreans cutting some sort of defense agreement this week with the Chinese. And if we unravel our alliances with Japan and Korea and the Philippines and all these places in the Asia Pacific and push them into the hands of the Chinese, because our dumb fuck president thinks about this in terms of being a cash register and not an alliance, it is something that is unfixable after he's gone.
Oof. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, so it's just like the stakes of the presidency, right? And
those are the stakes. Speaking of things that we almost can't do anything about, Chris asks, what are we going to do about judicial appointments? How do we come back from Republicans packing the courts, if anything?
It's a hard one. I think,
Chris.
Look.
Got to win that Senate?
We got to win the Senate.
That's it?
We have to win the presidency, and we have to face the fact that we have been losing on this battle. We have been just getting our asses handed to us.
Yeah, but I think like the judges that Trump put in place aren't going anywhere. They get lifetime appointments, so that's that. Yeah. And he's reshaped almost a quarter of the federal judiciary are Trump judges right now, which is fucking terrifying. But it just goes to show how badly we need to win the Senate and not just the presidency. Because if we win the presidency, not the Senate, there will be no more Trump judges or Republican judges, but there will be no more any judges.
Well, it will certainly mean that fewer Democratic appointed judges will get confirmed. We don't know that they'll stop it completely.
Yeah, well, we'll
see. We'll see. We don't know. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't.
Yeah.
I mean, look, we may actually be at the point where they simply will not confirm any more judges. Regardless, winning the Senate not just means confirming judges. It also puts even the possibility of judicial reform on the table. What that would look like is anyone's guess. Mayor Pete Buttigieg has a pretty bold proposal on that, but it does seem a bit fanciful at the moment.
Get Mitch or die trying. Donate to the Senate Fund.
Yeah, good call.
Okay, some fun questions.
Ooh, fun
thank
ones.
Goodness.
Just Fluffy on Twitter asks, do any of you eat tofurkey?
No.
Follow up, if you do, why do you hate yourself?
I want to take this question.
I had never heard of that until I guess I read that question.
I personally eat turkey. However, for those out there who partake in tofurkey, I think you deserve absolutely no judgment. And if you want to say that vegetarians and the moral and environmental choice they're making is silly, you can take that joke back to 1992.
Yeah, I think if you eat tofurkey, you're a bad person and you deserve punishment. No, I'm just kidding. Being vegan is good for the
I didn't realize that Just
blah, blah,
Fluffy is the Twitter account for Cory Booker.
I'm actually so
high hopes
excited.
for a turkey.
Oh my goodness.
I'm so sorry.
I am genuinely excited about the innovation happening in vegetarian food. Impossible Burgers, Beyond Burgers,
Yeah.
they are delicious, and I just like that.
This one's for you, Senator Booker.
Did you watch the Vox Explained on Netflix on this?
I
That
have
show's
not.
fantastic, by the way, and they did one on the future of meat, I believe.
I am very excited for the day when beautiful New York strip steaks are printed by a 3D printer like the size of pizza boxes. That's what I'm looking forward to. Think about it.
Yeah.
No,
No.
don't. If it's good, it's good.
Yeah.
From LB on Instagram. Canned cranberry sauce or no?
Can't. I love that gelatinous garbage.
No.
My
I don't
view-
like cranberry sauce, homemade or canned. I'm not a cranberry sauce fan.
I think the beauty. I don't like. I am
admit, Romney.
against. I am against just taking the
Romney.
can of cranberry sauce and just kind of thumping it onto the plate.
I love that's a good sound.
I much prefer a little bit of magic, a little bit of theater. Take that thump and put it in a bowl, mash it up, add maybe some walnuts to it. That's what Fran Lovett has done in the past.
Oh.
Then you've got a beautiful cranberry sauce. Did it start in a can? Sure it did. But
That's
it doesn't
innovative.
end in a can.
That's innovative. Kat Aaron, who is the amazing producer at Pineapple Studios, who's been doing the Iowa series with me, was saying she was making a mango pie. There's so much innovation happening, guys. Sparking innovation in cooking across the country.
Mashed potatoes and gravy and stuffing. Those are my two favorites.
Oh, what a man.
I know. Yeah, well. Chestnut stuffing, specifically. Lil Favreau's chestnut stuffing is...
I've had some Lil Favreau Thanksgiving
it's
cooking, and
legendary.
it's quite good.
Those are mine too. I'm pretty simple. You know, the turkey's fine too.
It's meat. Look, let's be honest. A ham is better.
Right.
than turkey.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's true.
Goyish
It's
nonsense.
very good.
Yikes. From Aaron and Goose on Instagram, pardoning the Thanksgiving turkey. Why is this still or ever a thing? Aaron,
It's fun.
let me just tell you.
Have some fun.
One of our favorite
What a joy.
White House moments as speechwriters was the turkey pardoning remarks. Right, Lovett?
So fun. Such fun jokes.
Because it was just how many really corny, cringeworthy jokes could we get Barack Obama to make? And
So
the
great.
answer was all of them.
All of them.
Because he never read the remarks until right before.
Right.
The best
He
thing
was
about
just-
that,
he would
would
just
laugh
stuck. Yeah.
as he was reading them, which is when you snuck a joke into a Barack Obama speech that he would read on the fly, laugh to himself, and then delivered. What a treat!
What,
And
do you
look-
guys remember
treat.
any cut ones that you didn't make it?
I
can't
don't.
remember.
Cody will know if
I can't
if he's
remember.
listening right now since he was there longer than both
Cody,
of
yell
us.
back through the thing.
But I just remember we spent way too much time on those remarks because they're like 5-minute remarks. And like you said, the president has other things to do and did not spend a lot of time on them.
But they're also something seen by millions of people.
True.
They get aired.
Yeah.
They get
Oh,
taken live.
everywhere. Also, guys, those were fun jokes, but the drafts of I was always allowed on the White House Correspondence Jokes drafts, even though I contributed nothing. But being on the email chains when the really mean, we all know they're going to get cut jokes went around was my favorite thing in the whole process.
Yep. It was pretty good.
So fun.
Hi Aves on Instagram asks, do Tommy and Fabs have wedding advice for Lovett?
You want
This
Hannah
question
to,
was not highlighted.
Here's
want Hannah to plan for you?
Well, I was going to say, here's the tricky part for me. Every couple has one part of the couple is the more organized part of the couple. I do not know between the two of you who seem like you can barely function in society.
Okay. I think I did fine. All right.
Who is going to put that shit together? Is it going to be Emily?
Throw
Is
money
Emily going to
at the
plan the
problem.
wedding for the two of you?
Throw money at the problem. Hannah's far more organized than me. Here's the problem I had, which was when I don't have an opinion on a decision, it feels painful to have to make it, so I tried to defer it. And then what I came to really understand was when you're constantly deferring to your partner on a decision, you're actually just loading the responsibility onto them, and that's not cool either. So you have to just find ways to have an opinion, even if they get overruled, because then you won't care.
I just want dominoes in an escape room. Is that so much to ask?
Well, I was gonna say, what I would say is what you remember about your wedding are the people who were there and the times that you had with the person you're marrying during that during that whole celebration because you're both really busy and there's a million things going on. And so as you think about it, make sure that the list is important, spending time with the people who came is important, and then obviously having time for you and Ronan to hang during the special day is important too.
Thank you for that advice.
I was just blacked out the whole time. I'm half kidding. I mean, dead sober hours that just sort of like anxiety just wiped away.
Yeah, that is very true too. Yeah. Have
So
fun.
have fun.
Have fun.
Great.
Like, you assholes.
From Alexis on Twitter, did John Lovett ever get Pete Buttigieg to play Risk with him online? If so, who won?
Has not happened yet.
Come on.
I proposed the game. Chasten did reply. I'm hoping to have an opportunity to talk to Mayor Pete, at the very least, about his strategy. He has spoken negatively, and I think fairly, about the classic Australia play. While that is a good early game strategy, you do get somewhat stuck into your expansion into Asia. Obviously, famously, Asia, a land war in Asia, very difficult. It's very hard. It is hard to expand from Australia outward. Sounds like he's more interested in a South America strategy. I respect that as well. Just interesting in talking with him about some of the nuances. For instance, if you are in Australia, are you moving up to Kamchatka? Are you moving west towards the Middle East? Right? These are the questions that I need Pete to answer if he's going to be someone I can see sitting behind that Resolute desk.
Yeah.
You know, he's going to be in the Situation Room, and he's going to have to decide: does he go for the Urals? Does he go for Siam?
Azores?
Not a territory, I don't believe. Japan is.
I was about to praise Mikey Barb's interview with Pete this morning on the Daily, but now there was a lot of questions that weren't answered. I can tell.
I used to play Risk when it was a board game, not online, and now I feel like I want to get back into it.
It's a
You
great
guys all
game.
seem like you're having fun online with Risk.
We have a
Everyone in the
great
office
time.
is-
Yeah,
What a great time.
there is a game always happening in this office. I believe we have 40 employees, 38 of them are playing. Not me, not John F., because we've never been invited.
Never invited.
Well,
I do like Risk.
you've lost the first round of Risk, it sounds like.
Having friends.
Last question from across the universe on Instagram. What are you thankful for? I will say the staff at Crooked Media. And you all have gotten to know some of them. There's many others that you don't. As we just mentioned, we're about 40 strong now. And just the incredible work ethic they bring every day, the incredible spirit they bring every day. These are some of the most talented, good-hearted people. I cannot believe every day we come to work that we have assembled a team like this. I cannot believe it.
Damn
I'm
right.
very grateful that in the midst
Still
of
haven't
the
hired
Trump,
any assholes.
Yeah, that streak's going to end. Every day grateful that in the midst of this sort of Trump crisis, we got the opportunity to build this company and to feel like we're part of it and helping others find a way to be part of the actual fight, because I do think it has been necessary to know that there are outlets where you can do something in the wake of so much unfairness and lies and mean-spiritedness, and that I am very grateful for.
I'd like to say I'm very grateful to my wife, Hannah, for that moment when I said, hey, I want to move to L.A. to start a podcast. She somehow agreed and somehow thought maybe this will turn out to be a good idea. Sure, let's uproot our lives in San Francisco, move to Los Angeles so you can talk into a mic with your friends once a week.
Aren't you glad you don't live in San Francisco?
I love my friends up there. I was there for a wedding last weekend. It was such a great visit. I realized that like that city is very into one thing, into tech or the people I knew, and I just wasn't as into it.
And here we are, guys.
Here we are.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
When we come back, we will have our interview with Adi Barkan.